So, welcome to a pitch video. Thank you for your time. This little clip, specifically, I think for YouTube with the size, we'll see how long I'm talking for. Forgive me. This pitch video is really just to see if there's any interest, creatively speaking, in the TV film world. There's a great storytelling world now between all the various platforms and Hollywoods and big scale, small scale animation. I'm really open to all suggestions with my story, right? So, like in terms of mediums and artists that would like to kind of take it and run with it if they're interested. So, this, in my mind, is a comic book graphic novel, right? But comic book graphic novels are also great screenplays for film and TV, obviously, right? So, this is called the Pink Panthers. The Pink Panthers. Okay, so let me, based on to some extent, we might have when you look at a copyright, whatever branding clearances and whatnot, but it's not the Pink Panther, it's the Pink Panthers, right? So I would really just want to use this couple of minutes to give you a world building impression of what the Pink Panthers stories and adventures are like. Really, character journeys are all in this series really to do with horrifying trauma, usually to do with what at the moment the types of sexual assault and sexual abuse, family abuse, family problems, right, which are somewhat taboo, but are becoming less and less taboo, which is a very good thing, I think. So the Pink Panthers is fundamentally somewhat inspired by the Black Panthers, right? So it's a hypothesis of saying, well, in this dystopian future, which is so dystopian future, it's a semi-dystopian future. It's a dystopia on the verge of utopia future, right? So the dystopia on the verge of utopia type scenario that the Pink Panthers will experience is something that picks up in the next kind of, in the very near future, right? And the plot, basically, the one of the early plots, my first trailer I did for this in my mind was actually was featuring a man fleeing jail, right? And the thing is, like, it was like how to create a really good cliffhanger for what has happened, what is in this dystopian future, what kind of situation is the world in, men, women, and politics, and what, and sci-fi dystopian kind of problems. What's the future, right? Again, my sort of offering artistically to that thought is one where the feminist struggle has become very violent. Okay, it's one where the feminist struggle has taken on not just corporate mentality, but not just fascistic ideologies. So the feminist movement descending is kind of what the Pink Panthers are into something that at times again will produce great moral dilemma and great moral ambiguity about right or wrong regarding cruelty in the home, men against men. It's basically the gender war, right? The Pink Panthers revolves around the gender warfare, the cycle of hatred and violence between men and women spiraling as if it were nation states, perhaps, right? Or if it were colonial powers, perhaps, and sort of trying to take many of the features of where women have become under most assault through warfare and rape and kidnapping and utility, like a chattel and all the rest of it in all the holy books. What would the Pink Panthers do with religions, given religious thinking, given religious attitudes, and given a slight tipping balance in the power? So essentially, in terms of the how does this come about type thing, it's a deepening strife on the basis that eventually women decide to just refuse to tolerate men in lots and lots of ways, and end up just deciding to use technology to reproduce to some extent. And there is this kind of, so it's just taking what is the male phobia of being just completely disregarded and completely non-useful, and because that's basically, I think, the gigantic male wound that men all have is the not being really relevant to women, or being rejected by women, or not really being a part of childhoods and having loving bonds and all the rest of it. So these things, my story would be about telling a story where men are very forgivable victims, really, throughout. Okay, but also at the same time telling stories about how horrific abusive men are to men, and then other women to other women, and other men to other women. So again, just to kind of play, not to play on Atwood at all. No, 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 no. I can see an Atwood level plot development, which is semi-satirical, right? And doing it in a sci-fi context is kind of like to make, like, parts of Pink Panthers would maybe feel a bit like Starship Troopers, right? Okay, like Like that's the kind of like, are you nuts? Well, like there's a mixture of not quite knowing the honesty of what we're watching, because there is irony in the idea that the world could be so reversed from what it actually is, grounded in reality. And we're teaching about our present as if it is history to the Pink Panthers. And the Pink Panthers kind of cultural mentality, their memory, their songs and stories and all the rest of it are about kind of early revolutionary acts, which are would be appearing right about our time or our near future, which would lead to women suddenly just deciding, why are we putting up with this? You're going to destroy the whole planet. You chimpanzee assholes, we're going to start rounding you all up and deleting you because we have to, right? And exterminating you, or doing fascistic stuff, monstrous things to like loads and loads of men. And just actually, because I don't think anyone's ever presented that. Like, what would that even look like? I don't even conceive of it. But just imagine women actually being able to overpower men. You know, the irony being that this is not the case, of course, and how absurd it is when male victimhood at the moment is used to justify all sorts of sex crime and sex warfare and all the rest of it, right? So for me personally, the Pink Panthers, I would love to pitch it as like a comic book novel. You know, so I've got in my mind several key characters, several key storylines, a couple of things. I'm no RR, what to call him, Mr. Martin or whatever, or Tolkien or anything like that. I'm certainly no Atwood, for God's sake. No, no, no. But I would like to put forward some thoughts that, you know, again, in the current political context and social context, I think would find a market quite easily is the thing. And it would be sort of trying to get something done fairly quickly and get it to market. And therefore, the property of the Pink Panthers, the brand the Pink Panthers, is what I'm prepared to license out to some extent. Do you know what I mean? In a way, I would be very happy to hear with some creatives that were interested in developing some storylines about female revenge, particularly female revenge, right? Because the Pink Panthers aspect for me is like to take the success of movies that do actually portray rape and sexual violence. And this is like trigger warning, big time. But movies that, because I'm a fan of the horror genre, I'm a fan of the sci-fi genre, I'm a fan of the action movie genre. I love it when these all bump together in different ways. Pink Panthers can do that, but with this, you know, to be honest, something that I think most people, modern sort of woke aware people, I would say, like myself, I would consider us curious about the dark side in ways, because we need to learn about the dark side. If we take the success of even things like, you know, these big stories like the Menendez stories, or you know, look, I don't need to necessarily drop properties and stories and think these are real life stories that have become very big properties, because I think that the market is interested in exploring these things, because these are real life stories. People have been through horrific rapes and gang rapes and things that have happened to them, and they just have no way of expressing or coping with that, right? And what I personally, as a man, have found very useful is seeing that these matters played out dramatically. So whether that be Outlander, whether that be what's the classic one? The classic one was called Spit on Your Grave. Oh yeah, I have a hypothesis that the first Pink Panthers, right, in the idea in the future, remember it's dystopian future, right? In my dystopian future, they've kind of got the very first Pink Panther as those Spit on Your Grave girls, right? As if they were semi-fine footage, or the again the fourth wall's come down somewhat, and they've witnessed that and they've had this experience, but they again see them as the early Pink Panthers because they took out revenge. You know, they acted out revenge, and I think that revenge is pornographic, isn't it? Revenge is a fantasy above all. Revenge is a fantasy, right? Because revenge does not really lead to happiness in the long run. Revenge is often folly. Seeking revenge is folly. There are many, many fantastic storylines that one could come up with in this dystopia, which I call the Pink Panthers future. Think of taking stories like real Black Panther stories about justice and liberation, fighting, standing up to the man, and all the rest of it, and trying to not just not co-opt or anything like that, but instead tell them more in a gender mode, right? So like uprisings, how women would cope with women's health issues, how to protect women from horrible fascistic male healthcare, male politics, the brokenness of corporate fascism, the brokenness of the sort of rapey colonizer. A lot of my political ideas would feed into the plots and the stories, and I would get to be able to tell my political ideas and even some of my own horror stories as a man, that things that I have been through. Because of course there will have to be the sympathetic stories where men and women are reconciling and trying to break the cycle of insanity when the innocent are harmed in the wars against the non-innocent, right? Do you know what I mean? So when totally benign fellas and lads are going through hell and being taken out by this lot, because we have to see collateral damage play out like that. This is just so legitimate that women and children are collateral damage, right, for the wars of today. Why on earth is that? And we need to get to a point where we see on screen or in story or in novel form or the book form that anger being played out. Lots of brutality and gore, hideous, horrendous, soft type gore, right? Torture, brutality, heinous activities out of revenge, the lust for revenge upon men. And that will be lusted out and taken out upon men who are predominantly innocent, which is exactly the insanity of what we deal with a lot of the time. Revenge cycles of violence are insanity. And so this story will be one that makes people go, ooh, you're glorifying violence. And look, you're making all this go like, ooh, because it will feel like Starship Troopers when they're wiping out scores of rapey men or American men or, whatever, doctors and fucking, I don't know who, lawyers and politicians, whomever it is. And it will feel a lot like that Starship Trooper wiping things out, because of the gender war that's broken down, and the hatred and the contempt between genders, whether that be men hating women and being determined to relentless amounts of cruelty and misery and horrors upon women, and vice versa, until we all fight enough and discover that it isn't because of the gender, it's not because of the gender, and they have to figure out what is happening. They have to figure out fundamentally, the Pink Panther people and the people of this future, to get to their utopia, to get to the future, to lead them into the future that will take one man, one woman, or maybe some interesting, something more triggering and a gender phenomenon, whatever kind of couple it is, come together, and there is tolerance. They're like, I would try and have, my ideal, right, is to have the whole thing end with like an absolute beast of an alpha female and a bit of a minnow of a hobbit man. I don't want the reader to read too much into this fantasy, because I don't know. It's more just about, it's not necessarily about any weird things in my head. It's more about trying to like see what disarmament could be across the genders to some extent, to see what surrender and peace and tolerance and cohabitation and collaboration and lifting one another up. So to see women lifting men up and men lifting women up in different ways throughout the story would be the beauty moments, would be the moments of melancholy and restorative peace. And there's a lot of potential in these stories, I think. So would it be better in a comic book? I think a comic book is probably what comes. If I'm honest, I would love to hear from a comic book artist. That would be my dream at this moment. But if somebody was more like, fuck this, put this straight into something new, AI, or make a TV thing out of it, whatever, just do something straight away, or just get a book published, even, that would be amazing. Because this, for me personally, my kind of political career and my Pilates career, my bike mechanic, it's all kind of like great, but I am like, I realize now I've got this creative, vibe, and we're not going to live forever, are we? So like, I would love to have some help to bring this to market somehow. So thanks very much for listening. That's my pitch for a feminist, ultra violent, dystopian sci-fi future novel, and I hope that makes sense to you. Thank you very much for listening. All the best. Bye bye. Bye bye. Bye.